If you haven't figured it out by now, Father Ling and I alternate preaching on the weekends. It's one of the perks of sharing the pulpit with another priest. And this weekend was supposed to be Father Ling's weekend to preach, but at the last minute, I got invited to celebrate Mass and bless the groundbreaking of a new rectory at St. Mary Catholic Church in Clinton, Oklahoma, last evening. So I had to write a homily anyway, and decided to let Father Ling off the hook for this morning's Mass. I must admit that I wasn't very happy when I read the scriptures for this Sunday, especially when I almost didn't have to preach them. They're not the most uplifting of messages found in the Gospels, and on the surface, rather confusing. In the Gospel, Jesus says, "I have come to set the earth on fire, and I wish it were already blazing." And if that wasn't harsh enough, a few verses later he says, "Do you think I have come to establish peace on the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division." If there were ever a time when we needed rain and unity, it's right now. And I distinctly remember the prophet Isaiah foretelling that a child would be born to us, a son will be given, and his name will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, and Prince of Peace. But let's not forget that the Prince of Peace was also willing to accept death on a cross, a brutal death that he didn't deserve. He called people to follow him into a new way of life. And then he said, "But enter through the narrow gate." He told his disciples to take nothing for the journey, no walking stick, money bag, or even sandals on your feet. But he also said, "Take up your cross if you want to follow me." And in his famous Sermon on the Mount, he said, "Blessed are you when they insult you and they persecute you and they utter every kind of evil against you because of me." Jesus desires a better life for us sinners, but he never said that it was going to be an easy life. Look at the poor prophet Jeremiah in the first reading today. He was sent by God to preach in a holy city to faithful people. And even then, he ended up in a muddy cistern, stuck and all alone. Let's be clear. The Lord is not endorsing the destruction of the world by fire. But if we choose to follow him and fully embrace the faith, then some things will be burned away. Things like selfishness and greed, hatred and division, to make room for charity, compassion, generosity, and peace. And once we embrace this life and we put nothing above God's love, then we must be willing to fight for it, to defend it, and to go to any extreme to preserve it. The last thing that our world really needs right now are simply nice Christians who blend in, who say nothing and do nothing, and think of faith only as a personal matter, something that we do on Sundays. Instead, we need to be bold in our witness to the faith and the power of God's love in the world, right now, everywhere, and every day. And we are so lucky, really, as Catholics, that we have a rich tradition, theology that is both ancient and new, rituals that reveal what we believe, worship that lifts our minds and our hearts to eternal realities, and social teachings rooted in God's plan for humanity, meant for everyone. Our God is a consuming fire, and Jesus uses this image of fire to describe the demands of discipleship. There is nothing passive about fire. It is alive, it burns, and it cannot be ignored. The fire he has come to cast on the earth is a fire that he wants to blaze in each and every one of us. The grace we received in baptism has the power to ignite our world, but if it is not used, it will become dormant and ultimately dead. The grace that couples receive in marriage has the power to reveal to all of us the love Christ has for his church in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, until death parts them. The grace a bishop, a priest, or a deacon receive in holy orders has the power to serve and to teach and to lead others in the ways of faith and in the person of Jesus Christ. By Christ's suffering, death, and resurrection, the fire has been set, but as we heard in the second reading, it is not yet blazing. Each of us is called to enter deeper into the consuming love of God in our vocations. We must examine our consciousness and our actions, submit ourselves to the fire of God's word, and then proclaim it boldly and unapologetically, so that the fire will spread and transform the world. Even in our struggle against sin, we have not yet resisted to the point of shedding our blood. We have not undergone the suffering that Jeremiah suffered. We should be also lucky to sink into a cistern of mud because we proclaimed the love of God without excuses like he did. To be a disciple is to be inflamed with the love of God. It is to have an unquenchable desire for holiness in our own life and in others, and a zeal for the salvation of our brothers and sisters, not just for ourselves. My brothers and sisters, being a disciple does not bring peace in the false way that the world so-called proclaims it. It requires a complete devotion to Christ and to his church that will inevitably lead to division and hardship. But Christ is our peace, and by his cross he has lifted us up from the cistern of sin and death, and he gives us food from heaven for our journey at this altar that will be our strength both now and forever.